Okay, I think everybody should be in the session now. Greetings, welcome to this third tutorial, the third one of our free online sessions. This week, I'm going to use FLUX Manage, which is our media browser, to show you how to add media into the new scene that we created in the last session. So I've already got Baselight Look running. So I'll share my screen and let's get started.
In the last session, we created a new job for our project, and I created a scene in the job called Camera Test Shots inside a folder called Tests. Now I've opened that scene again using the job manager, and as you can see, it just consists of an empty timeline. So to get media into the timeline, I'm going to use Baselight's built-in media browser called FLUX Manage. You can open FLUX Manage using the keyboard shortcut Control-B, or if you're working on a Linux Baselight, that would be Windows B. You can also open it from the Views menu here. The keyboard shortcut, that's Control-B on the Mac, is actually a toggle, so if I press it again, the window will close and then open again. And you'll notice that when I open it, it comes back the way it was when I closed it. Okay, so before we start looking for media, let me show you the different areas of the FLUX Manage window. First of all, up at the top here, you can see there's a tab labeled Browser 1. Now, FLUX Manage actually allows you to have multiple browser pages, so you can browse for different media in each of those pages and then combine them all together into one collection. To add another page, if you want to, you click on this button here. And interestingly, you'll see that the second page is called Browser 3 rather than Browser 2. Now that's because Browser 2 is actually on the other side of the FLUX Manage window. Now I pressed that button there to get it into two-pane mode. And in this mode, it would allow me to copy from one location to another simply by dragging and dropping. Now we're not going to use FLUX Manage to do any copying today, so I'll switch it back to just single pane view because it's simpler. And I can do that by clicking on this button. You can either use the left pane or the right pane. They're both the same. So below the browser button here, this button at the top left allows you to choose the source volume for this page. If I click on that button here, you'll see we have a drop-down list of all the media volumes that are accessible to this Baselight system. You can see that they are grouped into different sections. Starting at the top, we've got local volumes. So this is basically any drives that are physically inside the system itself. So in my case, this is the system drive, which I probably wouldn't use for storing media because obviously it's a fairly small drive, a bit slow, and I don't want to fill it up with big media files. The next section here, called Cloud Volumes, is actually network connected storage. This is connected via our Baselight Cloud network, which is a high-speed media network designed to transfer media very fast between Baselight, Daylight, and our FLUX storage systems. Now, depending on your network configuration, you may also have connections to non-Baselight storage, for example, NAS servers or SAN storage systems, and they could be configured also to appear in this list here, again, connected via our cloud network. The next section here, labeled Local Media, is other media drives that are connected to the local machines. So in my case, I've got a RAID drive which is plugged into my Mac, and that's called RAID 6. And then the last section here, Cloud Media, these are media devices that are connected to networked computers. So for example, if you've got a computer on your network which can be accessed by the Baselight system, and that has media attached to it, a media drive connected to it, then that would appear in this list here. So the media that I'm going to use for this particular project is all stored on my RAID drive. So I'm going to select this as my storage device. And you can see below that, this first column here, this shows you the top level directories for the selected media volume. And if I click on one of these directories, the next column shows me the contents of this directory, and so on. Now you'll notice that the bottom part of the window is empty at the moment. Now that would show any media in the directory that I've got selected at the top, but obviously there aren't actually any media files in this directory, only subdirectories. So once I click on a directory that does contain media, you'll see that the thumbnails for the media then appear at the bottom of the screen. And we also have a list of the media files within that directory in the column to the right. As well as displaying the media as thumbnails, you can click on this button and it now displays the media in a series of columns with various metadata. And you can change the metadata that's shown by clicking on this drop down here, and that then allows you to choose which columns you want to show and which ones you want to hide. So for example, if I'm not interested in the media encoding, I can turn that one off, turn off the resolution, and so on. While it's in column mode, you can also sort all the shots into a specific order by clicking on the top of any of these columns. So for example, if I want to sort it into timecode order, I just click on the timecode heading. And if I click on it again, you can see it's reversed the order. The timecode is now descending. So subsequent clicks will just change the direction of the sort. Okay, I'll go back to the thumbnail view for now, or sequence grid as we call it. Now you'll notice that we use the term sequences here rather than shots or clips. And that's because in Baselight, all of these separate shots are technically a sequence of images. Now these are actually EXR sequences, but if I choose another directory, for example this one actually contains ProRes movies, but at the top here it still says 13 sequences. And that's because technically a movie file is still a sequence of frames. They just happen to be contained inside a single movie file container. So this blue rectangle at the top here, which we call a tile, summarizes the shots in the directory you've currently selected. So in this case, we've got 13 sequences or movie files, a total of 1,660 frames, and they're using up 3.7 gigabytes in this directory. Now the icon here next to the file name indicates what type of movie file it is, what type of media file this is. In this case, these are movie files, and that's indicated by a little circle inside a film strip. If I go back to the previous directory, these are all image sequences, EXR sequences, and they're represented by this little film strip icon here. And if I choose this directory, you can see that there are all sorts of different types of media files in here. So let me quickly go through the different icons and what they mean. First of all, we have movie files, things like QuickTime, MXF, and so on. They are represented by this icon. And if the movie file also has audio contained in it, then there will be a little speaker icon. The image sequence, which you've already seen, is the film strip. And if you have just a single still image, then it'll be shown as just a single frame like this. Audio files such as WAV or AIFF will have a speaker icon. And then any files which are not recognized as media files by Baselight will be shown with the standard green file icon. There's one other kind of file which you'll see in FLUX Manage, and I'll just explain a little bit about that. And that's this one here. That's a BLG file. Now, BLG files are not actually media files. They're files which contain grading data, which we can use to transfer grades and looks between one Baselight system and another Baselight system, or a Baselight plugin, for example, in Avid or Nuke. And that's a subject for another tutorial. Finally, you'll see the directories themselves also have icons just representing the status of the directory. For example, if there's a directory which contains certain items which can't be read, it'll have a line through it. And if it's actually a link to a directory rather than a directory itself, then it'll be shown with an arrow like this. Now this directory contains both folders and media files. And sometimes if you've got a long list, it's sometimes a bit difficult to find the media files separate from the folders. So if we want to make it a bit easier to find them, we can click on the options button here and choose folders at top. And that'll put the folders at the top and then bring all the media files together. Now in this particular directory, you can see that we've got two non-media files. And if I want to find out what those files are, I can click on the Show Files button in the thumbnail, or I can also click on this button here, just to give me a list of the non-media files. Now FLUX Manage can't display non-media files, but if I right-click on, say for example this one, which is an EDL, I can reveal it in the Finder on the Mac, or if you're working on a Linux system, this would allow you to find it in the standard file browser on the Linux system. And from there, I can open it using whatever application I have on the Mac to view the file. So you can see that's just a straightforward EDL file there. Now if I switch back to the thumbnail view, and I'll go back to my camera tests directory. FLUX Manage isn't just a way of browsing for media, but we can also preview the shots directly from disk. And to do that, if I move the pointer, the mouse pointer, towards the top of the thumbnail, you'll see that a yellow bar appears. And while the yellow bar's there, if I click and then drag with the mouse pointer left or right, you'll see that it scrubs through the thumbnail, and you can also see the frame number, in this case the sequence frame number, updating at the bottom. You'll also notice that while I do that, this preview button here turns blue, and it's temporarily pressed in while I'm clicking the mouse. Now I can lock it into preview mode by clicking on that button, and if I move the FLUX Manage window out of the way, you'll see that as I drag through that, it also updates the image display and the scopes. Now on my system, the image display is actually in my UI monitor, but if you're working on a full Baselight system, or if you had an external monitor connected to your Mac, this would appear on that monitor. So you'll be able to get a fairly accurate preview of the material before you actually put it into the timeline. Now if I click on the play button, it'll also play through that material. Remember, it's playing it directly off disk, so the performance will be limited by the disk that you're playing back from, or the network. But you can see that it'll loop through that shot while I'm previewing it. Okay, I'll just cover the other areas of the FLUX Manage window, and then we can select some media to add to our currently empty scene. Firstly, when I select a shot in the thumbnail or list view, the metadata appears on the right-hand side here. Now, as these are EXR sequences, you can see there's a lot of metadata, but some file formats don't have as much metadata. For example, these are ProRes shots, and you can see that there's far less metadata compared to the EXR sequences. There's a blue tile at the top of the metadata list which summarizes the shot that I've got selected. In this case, you can see there's 168 frames and a total file size of 397.6 megabytes. You can also select multiple shots by command clicking on each one, or you can select a range by clicking on the first one and then shift clicking on the last one. You can also deselect all the shots by pressing Command Shift and A, or on a Linux system that would be Control Shift and A. And you can also select all the shots by pressing Command or Control A. While I've got multiple shots selected, if I just move the FLUX Manage window over to one side again, and once again press the preview and play buttons, if I click in one of these shots, you'll see that the play will continue from one shot into the next. So it gives you a preview of all the shots that you've selected in the FLUX Manage window. Okay, I'll just stop the preview playback and move the window back over here. And incidentally, when you've got multiple shots selected, the one that's currently highlighted, or the one that's currently showing the metadata here, is highlighted with a corner selection, but you still have a summary of all the shots that you've selected at the top here. So this is just showing the metadata for the currently selected shot, rather than all the shots that I've selected. Okay, there's a few other buttons I'll point out while we're looking at the FLUX Manage window. Firstly, this button here allows you to add bookmarks. Just as in the Job Manager, if there's a location within our directory structure that we want to get back to quickly, we can add a bookmark for it, and then that'll allow us to jump back there quickly. This next button here allows me to enter a directory path rather than browsing for media here. So if I know a path, a specific path to somewhere that I want to find on disk, I can just type or paste the path into here and then hit the go button. The next button will take me to my home directory, which is probably not somewhere you would have media stored, but as you saw at the beginning, FLUX Manage can be used to copy files from one place to another. So if we've got files in our home directory and we want to copy them somewhere else, for example, we've downloaded something from the internet, we want to copy it onto a media drive, then we can use FLUX Manage in the to panel mode to allow us to copy from, say, our home directory to a destination directory. The next button along will add a new folder or directory in our current directory. And then this button here, this long button here is actually the path to the currently selected directory. If I click on this, you can see that we can navigate back up the media directly all the way up to the root of the current volume. If I click on the slash, then this has taken us back up to the top level. But I created a bookmark so I can get back to where I was quickly. And there's one other button that I should point out. It's the F button. If you remember in the last session about the Job Manager, I showed you the filter button at the top of each of the columns to allow you to filter that column by typing in a few characters. Well, I can do the same here. If I want to filter these files by their file name, you can see that they all begin A001. So if I click on the F button and now type in A001, and it doesn't, it's not case sensitive, remember. If I now click on the filter button, now you'll see that unlike the Job Manager, which just simply created a filtered list, FLUX Manage has actually created a complete filter for us. And at the top here, you can see we've now got another new tab. And at the top, it says Filter Result. That's the second mode, if you like, of FLUX Manage. It allows you to create filters, some very powerful filters using metadata. But we're not going to cover that today. That'll be the subject of a future tutorial. So I'll go back to my original browser window. In fact, I'll close the filter window. In fact, I'll close my second browser window as well. This is the only one that we're using at the moment. Now, I actually want to include all the media in the camera tests directory, but you can see that it's actually split across these three subdirectories. So rather than have to select each one and select all the shots in each one separately, I can select them all together by going back up to the higher level directory, in this case it's camera tests, and then using the descend button. And when I click on that, you'll see we get a little warning pop up because it's possible there could be an awful lot of files below this point, and it could take quite a while to scan through them all and read all their metadata. So it is warning us that it could take a while. I'm going to continue because there isn't much in my directory. And you can now see that this is showing us all 26 shots or sequences within the camera test directory and its subdirectories. As I want to add them all to my timeline, I'll press Command A to select them all. Now, before I add all these shots to the timeline, there are a couple more things I need to check. First of all, I need to make sure that they have the correct input color space. Now, the bottom here, you can see there's a button next to where it says color space, which says scene default, and that's going to read the color space information from the metadata. Now, most professional camera formats and rendered media should automatically set the color space correctly for the source media. However, some file formats may not contain color metadata, or you may have rendered files where the information is actually incorrect. For example, if I go back to this directory here, and you can see that these files here, these thumbnails all look a bit washed out. If I select one of them, at the bottom here, you can see it says Rec 709. So Baselight is reading that metadata and assuming that they are Rec 709 clips. In fact, they were rendered out with an ARRI log C color space. So that is incorrect. And if I click on this button here and manually change it to ARRI log C wide gamut, you can now see that they look much more colorful, and that is actually the correct color space for those shots. Also, if I right click on one of these thumbnails, you can see that we have an option to view the thumbnails without color conversion. And if I click on that, you see they've all gone back to the fairly washed out look they had before. That's because Baselight isn't applying the log C to sRGB conversion, which is needed to accurately view the images in my display. If I right click on that and choose to view the thumbnails converted to sRGB, which is the color space of my UI monitor, then once again they look correct. So I'll go back to, in fact, I'll just change that back to automatic, the scene default from metadata, and then go back to my original directory. Again, they look correct, and that's because Baselight is correctly reading the color metadata from the files. Now, the other settings down at the bottom here are the format and the frame rate. Now, you can see for format, it says multiple selection, and we're going to talk about formats in another tutorial. But what Baselight will do basically is it will automatically fit whatever the aspect ratio of these shots is. It'll automatically fit them into the working format of our scene, which is 1920 by 1080. And finally, the frame rate, which is set to 25p, as that's the working frame rate of our timeline. Now, to add the shots to the timeline, I can either click on the Insert Sequence button here, or I can actually drag this tile from the top here and simply drop it into the timeline. Okay, now all the shots are in the timeline, and I can close the FLUX Manage window using the button up here. And I'll zoom the timeline out all the way by pressing F7 on the keyboard. So you can now see all the shots in our timeline. So as you can see, there's quite a bit more to FLUX Manage that we didn't cover today, but you should now be able to use it to easily find media and insert it into your scenes. Okay, well, as you probably guessed, that session was pre-recorded. It just makes it a bit easier for us to do that. We can also then answer questions as we go through. However, I will now switch back to the live Baselight look timeline. There was one question that came in the chat, and that was a question regarding whether or not the same input color space applies when you're using Baselight for Avid, which is our plugin version of Baselight, which runs inside Avid Media Composer. Avid itself, or the plugin, obviously doesn't have FLUX Manage because FLUX Manage is part of the full Baselight. When you're working in Avid, the plugin is per shot. It is just a plugin. However, the same input color space management is applied, and that's applied within the source strip. We're going to next week. We'll look at the stack. The timeline and strips in the timeline, and we'll explain a bit more about the information that's stored in those. But one of the bits of information you can see here is the input color space, and indeed that would be the same if you're working inside the Avid plugin. Okay, I'm not sure, I can't see any other questions. Okay, so we'll leave it there this week. As you can see, we now have a new scene, and our timeline in the scene is now fully populated with media. So next in the next session, we'll be looking at actually adding some grades to the media, and talking about layers and other things that happen in the timeline. Okay, so thanks again for joining us. The edited version of this video will be on our website along with the other ones within a few days. Okay, thanks again.
Yeah, thanks also from my side. Bye bye.
Bye.